You're now listening to The Pick is In. The Pick is In Fantasy Football Podcast. And now your host, Matt Kelley.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Matt Kelley, and if you're listening to this, you have made it to Friday, and today we're going to be talking about a Dynasty Startup draft and our squads here on The Pick is In Fantasy Football Podcast. With me today, I have two of my teammates who are also writers and contributors over at DynastyProsFootball.com, Chris Gregory and Alex French. Before we jump in, just want to remind you to go follow the show on Twitter at The Pick is In FFP. You can find the podcast currently on Spotify and on YouTube. I'll bring in my guys, Chris and Alex, and before we jump into this draft, guys, I was recording the first episode of this just a few nights ago, talking about the NFL opt-out period in regards to COVID. Nobody at that point had really opted out that was of note. And then sure enough, yesterday we get Damian Williams, running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. He opted out. Obviously, that opens things up for rookie Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And this kind of segues us right into the draft because Alex actually ended up taking Damian Williams in round 13 of this startup draft. So, Alex, I'll turn to you first. How do you feel about Damian Williams long-term for Dynasty, and what does it do for Clyde Edwards-Helaire for you?
Well, honestly, Matt, it kind of hurts in multiple ways. One, I think that Damian Williams' career might be over because of this opt-out. He was already on his second team, and now when he opts out of this season, it just opens the door for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to take the job and just run with it. The other reason that it hurts me is I actually traded with you in this draft to get back into that round to pick him. So it ended up costing me, I think I gave a 14th and a 16th for that pick, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
so it ended up costing me 3 picks. And now he's just going to be, I actually just cut him today because I don't have any faith that he's going to be able to find his way back on the field, at least in Kansas City. Maybe he gets a chance somewhere else.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're just in this buyer beware period, whether you're starting a Dynasty Startup or a redraft league. It's just going to be kind of dicey here until we get to August 4th to see if guys are going to be opting out. Of course, we have no clue what's going to happen during the season. Chris, what's that do for you specifically for Clyde Edwards-Helaire more than Damian Williams?
I wrote an article back in May, actually, that went up on Rotoballer. And in that one, I listed basically all the reasons why I was actually having Edwards-Helaire over Aaron Jones already. I went into detail basically about how I didn't think Damian Williams was going to be a big problem for him. I didn't see him as an issue in Florida for Jay Ajayi or Kenyon Drake. I didn't see him as a long-term or really short-term threat to Edwards-Helaire. I thought the Chiefs drafted him with the first-round pick because Andy Reid wanted a starting running back that he could count on, just like he did with Westbrook and McCoy and Hunt and Deuce McAllister in the past. I expect lots of production from him and probably a top 10 running back now. Definitely in the top 20 picks, both in redrafts and in Dynasty.
Yeah, I was going to say, this has pretty much ended any sort of discount that you might have been getting on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Certainly, he's probably going to start going, at the very least, into the back of the second. I think in a lot of redraft leagues, he's probably going to even get pushed into the first. Not necessarily saying that's where I would personally go. Just saying for your home redraft leagues, things like that, people are going to be, just itching to get their shares of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So it's kind of what I'm expecting, and obviously he is going to be probably dominant as the next Kansas City Chiefs running back there. So let's get into...
I had one more note, if you don't mind, Matt.
Yeah.
On the other holdouts, Marcus Cannon, I think, is a sneaky impact holdout right now. No, I'm not seeing it mentioned a whole lot on websites, but people are drafting Sony Michel, they're drafting Cam Newton, they're drafting James White. I think Marcus Cannon being out could impact Sony Michel the most. That's their starting right tackle. He's a good tackle. They'll feel that in the running game and possibly in the passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are definitely going to be the ones that don't get talked about as much, and you got to keep an eye on, so that's a good call there. The offensive line can obviously affect fantasy players in different ways. So something to keep an eye on there in New England, as they did have quite a few guys opt out over the past week. So this Dynasty Startup Draft, quite different in the settings. It's something that I personally haven't, all the settings combined, I haven't participated in a Dynasty Startup like this. So let's talk about it just a little bit. It was a SUPERFLEX PPR. The tight ends are get a premium at 2 points per reception. Starting lineups are 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, 3 flex spots, and a super flex spot. So super deep starting lineups here for this Dynasty Startup Draft, and we'll just kind of walk through our how the draft board fell and what we were kind of thinking once these picks got slotted to us. So I ended up in the 6 hole. Alex ended up drafting from the 9 spot, and Chris from the 10. We were hoping it would be a little bit more spread out, but that's just how the chips fell. So the first 5 picks were pretty typical with one exception, and I'll get into that, and that's why I went where I went at number 6, 101, Christian McCaffrey. Then Patrick Mahomes, Saquon Barkley, Michael Thomas, and Ezekiel Elliott. I'll be honest, I thought I was going to be choosing between Michael Thomas and Ezekiel Elliott. That's just the way I had seen the board falling so far in SUPERFLEX setups that I had been taking a part in. And so Lamar Jackson ended up falling. I have Lamar Jackson nowhere. I have Lamar Jackson as the number 2 quarterback in a SUPERFLEX setup. I think that's great. So that's where I went at the 106. Chris, I know you think a little bit differently about quarterbacks, so let's get your take on that, and then I'll kick it over to Alex.
I do. I think there's a couple of factors I factor into the 2 QB and SUPERFLEX format. I still think that I can wait on those and get stronger at running back, wide receiver, and in this format, tight end. I thought Lamar and Patrick Mahomes are both great players. I'm not faulting anybody for taking them early. I am not doing that, and I've played 25 years of fantasy football. I don't think I've ever drafted a quarterback in the first 4 rounds, and it's just how I do it. It almost always works out for me. And I just think the difference between the number 1 quarterback or the number 2 quarterback or the number 3 quarterback and the 15th quarterback on the board is smaller than the difference between RB1, RB2, RB3, and RB15, RB16.
Yeah, and as we were talking about it, we were kind of going back and forth on Twitter, keeping up with the draft board, and out of the gates, I was like, man, this is one of the weirdest drafts I've ever had. Like, everything that I would normally do, I'm not doing in this draft for whatever reason, just mostly because how the draft board is falling. So let's keep going with the draft here just real quick. Alvin Kamara went right after Dalvin Cook, and then it went to Alex, who traded out of that spot. So I'll come back around to Alex in the 2 spot talking about that trade. And then Chris, you went ahead at 110 and snagged Joe Mixon.
Can I ask Alex, who would you have drafted there if you didn't trade out?
That's a great question, and one of the reasons that I ended up trading out of the pick is because the guy that I was hoping would fall to me, Matt, you and I had discussed a little bit earlier about guys that you might be surprised fall enough in SUPERFLEX at that 9 spot. If I had taken the pick, it was going to be Joe Mixon. I was hoping that Kamara would fall to me. I kept seeing him just slip further and further down the board, and then as soon as I saw him go off the board, I had to switch out and change my train of thought, and that was one of the reasons I moved out.
Yeah, and at that slot, George Kittle ended up going, which I think, Chris, you thought you were going to end up snagging, right?
That's why I asked, because Alex's trade screwed me a little bit. Kittle in this format, he played 14 games last year and got 86 catches, I believe. That's in 14 games. He was on pace for over 100. And for 2 points PPR, that's ridiculous. And he's young. This is a dynasty format. Plus, I'm a diehard 49ers fan. That never helps when you love the player already. And I actually played high school football at the same high school that George Kittle played high school football at. So I had a lot of reasons to want George Kittle. But in this format, I'm going to do some rankings for this type of format soon. He's a top 10 player easily for me because of that 2 point. Easily. So him and Dalvin Cook were my 2 ideal people picking at 10. Neither of them made it to me. And at that point, I like Mixon. I always go running back heavy early. He's still younger than people think he is because he came into the league so young. I believe he's turns 24 this summer, which is it's younger than Dalvin Cook. I believe it's younger than Kamara. It's older than Saquon, but at pick 10, he's a pass-catching running back. The Zach Taylor, who I played high school football with, he was my quarterback, and he likes to run the ball a lot. He has shown a tendency to be a one running back guy. So I think hopefully Jonah Williams shows up at left tackle for the Bengals and improves that offensive line, because if he does that, Joe Mixon, to me, has a chance to break into the top 5 running backs and be this year's Dalvin Cook, who was drafted as a late RB1, early RB2, and can break into those top ranks.
Yeah, to me, I mean, Joe Mixon has the backfield to himself. Cincinnati is on the come up in terms of offense as a whole, so don't think you can go wrong with Mixon there. Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins round out round number 1. Devontae Adams goes with the first pick of round number 2, followed by Nick Chubb, and then Chris, man, sniped me. I really thought some more tight ends in this format were going to go off before Josh Jacobs. I wrote about Josh Jacobs being a top 5 dynasty running back over at dynastyprosfootball.com. I just thought, I was like, oh, Miles Sanders will go, a couple more quarterbacks. I was like, surely Josh Jacobs was safe, and man, took him right out from under me. I was so upset.
I have a lot of shares of Josh Jacobs. I did last year too. I didn't think he'd be there at 14. I think that's a good value. Like I said, I like to go RB heavy. I was hoping with this pick Mark Andrews would fall to me in the next round, and he did. In Dynasty with this format, I wanted a good tight end, but I really wanted I couldn't pass on Jacobs.
Yeah, I don't blame you whatsoever. Where are you at, Alex, on Josh Jacobs?
No, I agree completely. You said he sniped you. He was picking right in front of me.
Yeah.
And I just kept seeing Jacobs. Yeah, I kept seeing Jacobs fall, and I was getting so excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. It's going to be a steal. I'm going to start out with a solid running back, and he went right before me. So I agree. I'm all in on Jacobs this year.
So Josh Jacobs, well-liked over at dynastyprosfootball.com. So, Alex, that ended up leaving you with a decision to make, and you went Philadelphia Eagles running back Miles Sanders. I talked about him a little bit the other night on episode 1 of the pod. So I have my thoughts on Miles Sanders, but I want to hear yours and why you went with Miles there.
Oh, I believe in the talent. I love the player. I love what he did down the stretch last year. It took him a little bit to get going, but once he did with the Howard injury and it was his backfield, he dominated with it until he left with injury. And I think that he's the type of player to make Doug Peterson break his mold of, I'm going to be a committee guy. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I think he's going to get that 3-down workload. If you're getting 12 to 15 touches a game out of him, I think he's going to be able to capitalize on that. And I have my reservations about the Eagles. Last year, he got a lot of passing work because there was injuries all over the field. And I think we're all expecting Alshon Jeffrey to start on PUP again.
Mm-hmm. He is at least on PUP for training camp, for sure.
Right, but that week 1 where he's going to miss. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm...
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that you said you expect kind of that cap of maybe 15, 16 touches for Miles Sanders. I think people have been more in the 18 to 20 range, and I just don't think that's in the cards for Miles Sanders personally. I think Peterson has been running back by committee long enough to where, I mean, yes, Miles Sanders is going to get the majority, no doubt about that. But I think Boston Scott's going to contribute as well. I'll talk more about him later. But yeah, well, actually, I think you have a reasonable expectation of Miles Sanders there.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Boston Scott last year was also getting time with Miles Sanders before he got hurt, and they were both still getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe Boston Scott was getting, 5 targets a game, and it didn't take away from Miles Sanders at all. There was enough need for passing targets there that they were both still getting the volume. So I was very happy to get him at the spot that I did.
Yeah, and it's of note that Philadelphia still hasn't brought in anybody. LaShawn McCoy signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers today, so that's one more running back off the board. Carlos Hyde going over to the Seattle Seahawks. So there's only so many guys left out there, and it looks like Philly may just Philly may honestly just go with what they got there in Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson go off the board back-to-back, which leaves me with the 207. Travis Kelce ended up coming to me, so I went Travis Kelce. Much like Chris was saying in this format, tight ends are just so much more valuable at 2 points per reception. I couldn't pass up Kelce. I know he is 30 years old this year, but he's tied to the best quarterback in the league, in my opinion, in Patrick Mahomes. He's been getting at least 80 catches a year for like the last 4 years. I think he's just going to be a monster in this format. So I felt really good about going Travis Kelce there. Kind of scared me to pass up on running back and have to wait. And I'll tell you about that, why we had a big running back run here over the next round or so. It went Derrick Henry, Dak Prescott, Chris Godwin, Jonathan Taylor, and then Alex, you slotted back into the 212 as a part of that trade out at 109, and you ended up going with Russell Wilson, a top 5 quarterback for sure. How do you feel about Russ's prospects for 2020, bud?
Oh, I love that I was able to get him. I'm typically with Chris on this, where I will typically wait on quarterback, but since I was able to trade back and get another second-round pick, I was much more inclined, and I wanted one of those top 6 guys. And I was able to get it with the last pick of the second round in Russell Wilson. He's always been super efficient. I think that's going to continue. He may have a couple of those games where he just disappears, but he's also got the rushing, and I'm hoping it's the squeaky wheel, squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
him talking about wanting to pass more, and that's when they're most efficient. So I'm hoping that comes to fruition.
Yeah, they've got two monsters there in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, so no reason not to put the ball in Russell Wilson's hands, in my opinion. Kenyon Drake goes at the 301. The aforementioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the 302. Probably wouldn't have went there had the news dropped sooner. He probably would have went earlier than that. 3-3 DJ Moore, J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones. I felt like there was a huge drop-off at running back, a running back who I no longer have. I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But at the 306, I went Austin Eckler. Feel really good about Eckler this year, despite the change at quarterback, whether it be Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert. I think he'll get his in the passing game. The guy just gets loose wherever he goes. How do you guys feel about Austin Eckler for 2020?
I picked up Eckler 2 years ago, and over half my leagues when he was the backup, but he was still getting that passing game. I got him in the preseason. I liked watching him in the preseason, and he's kind of proven himself to be at least worthy of a Darren Sproles type role, which means he's going to be, as long as he's healthy, relevant as an RB2 at the worst in PPR for the next few years. And I think he definitely has the talent to be your top back in PPR.
Yeah, and I was staring down, after that, DeAndre Swift, Todd Gurley, David Montgomery, Melvin Gordon, just some of the names that went after Austin Eckler. So, Alex, do you feel like that's enough of a tier break to have went Austin Eckler there?
Yeah, absolutely. And Austin Eckler is one of those guys that I'm actually starting to come around on the more that I look into his performance. And I know that he has always been that super efficient guy. There was a stretch there where he ended up getting all of the work, and he still performed, but his efficiency went down a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think they're gonna keep him in that 55-60% of the snap share range for that backfield. And if they do that, I think his targets are going to drop a little bit. But I actually saw a stat the other day. Tyrod Taylor actually checked down to non-designed run plays 8.7% of his dropbacks, which isn't something that you would normally get if we expect him to start from a mobile quarterback. So just all of the different statistics that I'm seeing about Austin Eckler is making me come around a lot more on him this season.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get a bad season out of Austin Eckler. I don't necessarily know that it will be what it was last year. It really just depends, to your point, what that snap share looks like for Eckler. So we shall see. Josh Allen going off the board. Juju Smith-Schuster jumping up into the 308. And then Alex back into the 309 with A.J. Brown, who is just a monster of a human being. Man, I like the pick. I'm on the A.J. Brown train. I know there's going to be games where the volume is low from the Titans, but in a dynasty startup, A.J. Brown showed he's got a lot to offer. How happy were you that A.J. Brown fell to 309?
Oh, I was quite happy to get him there. Some drafts I've seen him go a little later than that, but at this point with this format and with it being 12 teams starting 3 wide receivers, I wanted to start hitting the wide receivers pretty heavily. Like you mentioned, he's just a freak human being. He's hard to tackle, excellent after the catch, and with the Titans losing Conklin on the right side, I don't know that they're going to be able to be as efficient with their run game. So I think we all expect a little more passing coming out of Tennessee, and if that happens, it's going to be the A.J. Brown show all over again.
Yeah, I think Ryan Tannehill himself is a pretty good value, and I was writing I think I was actually writing about Deshaun Watson and efficiency from a quarterback touchdown percentage, and Ryan Tannehill has been over 5% in each of his last 2 seasons, so I think he's lacking a little bit of credit, honestly, and so I think he'll be able to sling the rock and feed A.J. Brown enough to make that pick worthwhile. Chris, as you mentioned, Mark Andrews, you jerk, again, fell to you at 310. I really thought you were going to keep hammering running backs and wide receivers just with the way you were talking about your draft strategy, but you ended up going Mark Andrews. How happy are you about Mark Andrews there at 310, man?
Like I said, in this one, I seriously thought about trading up to about 3-1, 3-2 range, either to get Edwards or Andrews. I did not think Andrews would fall to me in this format. Mm-hmm. I think we all three saw that in this draft group there's 12 teams, and I felt like 7 or 8 of them didn't care one lick about the 2 tight end or 2-point reception. Yeah. You and I mentioned tight ends in there after we got 2 or 3 of them, and everyone's like, "Nah, I'm fine. Once you miss the first couple of guys, I'm like, there's about 5 or 6 at least who are impacted by this PPR."
Yeah, I think that's going to show up as the season progresses, where guys kind of, it's a premium for a reason. It drives up especially these high-end guys. And Mark Andrews, I think, is going to take a giant step forward in that I think Lamar is just going to throw a little bit more. He likes the stuff over the middle, and Andrews is obviously going to see the field more than he did last season as well. So Kenny Golladay going right after that. DeAndre Swift ends the 3rd round. Mike Evans, Cam Akers start round 4. And then Chris with another huge value, getting Julio Jones at 403. Julio, man, you're going to be happy with that one.
Yeah, that's what, the 38th, 39th player on the board. I was thrilled to get him as my one.
Yeah, I think he fell too far.
Oh, absolutely. I think I was worried that a guy traded up for the first pick in round 4, and I was worried he was going Julio, but he went Mike Evans. I get why he went Mike Evans. He's younger. He's playing with Tom Brady, so this year he's got some boost in PR. But I think Julio could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy this year. He's still young enough to contribute for the next 3 years as a wide receiver 1. I was really happy that he fell to me, and it's the first time I've ever owned Julio because, like I said, I always go RB heavy early, and Julio's always going late round 1, early round 2. That's where I take running backs, so I never took him, even though I really like him. But in round 4, yeah, I'll take Julio Jones.
Yeah, I think just the fact that it's a startup, it is SUPERFLEX, it is tight end premium, just kind of enabled Julio to go. Obviously, some people are higher on these rookies, and age factors into some of these selections, and I think that's a good spot to kind of mention. Guys like Julio still has 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years left. So I think sometimes people tend to overlook these veterans who, yeah, maybe they're on the back end of their career, but they're still going to help you contribute and win and play at a high level. So I think Julio Jones is just an absolute steal there. It's probably somewhere I should have looked. I was looking more at running back when I went with Eckler. I just felt like the tier break was too much to wait on. But yeah, Julio Jones, man, nice value there at 403. Alex, again, right after with OBJ. Are you in on the? I guess you have to be in on the OBJ rebound.
Yeah, actually, I got sniped again here by Chris because I was looking at Julio. I think that was an absolute steal. Might have been the value of the draft, honestly, so far to this point. As far as OBJ goes, I think that last year, if you look at his numbers, it was certainly disappointing from what you expect from Odell Beckham,
Mm-hmm.
but it also showed that he had that sports hernia injury, and he had an injury he was fighting through. With that being said, he's always been one of those guys that kind of misses a few games here and there, but he played all 16 last year, even in spite of that injury. So I think that he's refocused and recommitted to his craft again this season, and I think that he is going to be significantly more efficient. He's always been that guy that can take a slant 98 yards for a touchdown. So I think that we're going to see more of that and an improved efficiency in the passing game. I think him and Baker and that entire Cleveland Browns offense was really hampered by their play calling and their coaching and offense all of last season. So
Yeah,
I think we see them take a step forward.
Yeah, I watched way more Browns football last year than I like to admit, but it's because I was so invested in Nick Chubb. And so I ended up watching a lot of Browns football last year, and the offensive line was just horrendous. Yes, Baker was terrible, but that offensive line, man, he just had absolutely no time. Odell really had no time to develop any sort of routes. He was playing through the sports hernia. They've improved that offensive line over the offseason. And like you said, they're going in a new direction there. So I'm kind of back in on OBJ too. I'm not really scared off by the injuries. It's more so whether that offensive line meshes and they keep trending in a positive direction with all the changes there. So Calvin Ridley goes right after that, followed by Melvin Gordon. The 407 comes up, and I'm staring at receiver, wondering if I should finally take a receiver. Should I add another running back? The 2 points per reception bears in the back of my head, and I end up going Zach Ertz. So to this point in the draft, through 4 rounds, I have a quarterback, 1 running back, and 2 tight ends. The typical start you would think of in a dynasty startup. So Zach Ertz, though, man, I mean, it's really the same boat. The guy is a PPR machine. He's going to get 70 to 75 grabs. As we mentioned before, Alshon Jeffrey likely to start on the pup. I think he's the top option back there in Philly again. I don't think it's the rookie and Rager. D-Jax isn't really a PPR sort of guy. He has the relationship there with Wentz. It's a wonky start for me. What do you guys think about Ertz there? I'll go with Alex first.
I actually texted you right after you made this pick because with that trade out of the first, I had a second, 4th round pick, and I was hoping he would fall to me because of all of the reasons that you said. He's a PPR monster. That 2 points per reception is really going to benefit him. And like we talked about earlier with Miles Sanders, there's been a lot of injuries in that receiving core, but Zach Ertz is always there, and he's got that chemistry with Carson Wentz, and there's no denying that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have the take, and it's been a take for a couple of years now, I suppose, that his workload is going to be cut into, and by Dallas Goedert, and I'm not anti-Dallas Goedert, but I just still believe Zach Ertz is the one there. What do you think, Chris?
I am someone that thinks that Goddard could cut into him a little bit more because I think they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets this year. I think that they invested heavily at receiver now. I'm not overly in love with any of the receivers they have. I wasn't a big Rager fan, as we discussed on the Dynasty Pros rookie draft. I'm fine with Rager. I do think he'll probably end up getting the most targets of their receivers, but I do think Goddard could cut in. Now, it doesn't mean Zach Ertz is not a tight end 1.
Sure.
It means that on my board, instead of Zach Ertz being an easy top 50 pick for me like he's been in the past, he's a 65 instead of 50.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you if it's just standard PPR all the way across the board,
Sure.
And the 2 PPR kind of just pushed me into that direction. So, again, I'm Matt Kelley. This is the Pick is Fantasy Football Podcast. I've got Chris Gregory and Alex French in with me today. You can follow Chris over at _pre-snap read. Follow Alex over at TheBlindGuyFF over on Twitter. Amari Cooper, David Montgomery, Joe Burrow, Allen Robinson, ending out the 4th round until we get to Alex, and Alex goes Todd Gurley. Oh, buddy, I need you to talk me out of this one.
All right. So the way that I look at this, I've kind of come around a lot on Todd Gurley with the injuries. One, I'm probably biased because he did help me win a fantasy championship a couple of years ago.
Sure.
However, he's still only 25 years old, and he has been dealing with this arthritic knee condition since his days at Georgia. And when he's on the field, he's super efficient. Last year was definitely not a good year for him, but even still, he put up 14 touchdowns last year. They didn't use him in the passing game. Atlanta is an offense that we know you could just pencil him in for over 600 pass attempts, and they like to throw to their running back. So if he gets back in that pass-catching role, which we expect, it's a full PPR, and he's only 25. I mean, he's been dealing with a condition. I'm just not as concerned about his knee condition as maybe in the past. So I love the talent. I think he's going to get the usage. And let's be honest, does he really have any competition back there?
Yeah, so that is the thing. And I wrote about him a little bit, and I'm just kind of on the fringe as far as Todd Gurley goes. In Dynasty, in redraft, I'm there. I'll take the chance for a one-year thing. To your point, he has absolutely no one behind him. He's going to get the full workload there in Atlanta, but the knee does worry me, and the other thing that worries me is the investment that the Rams just decided they were going to opt out of. Paid $20 million to basically send him packing into Atlanta, and so sometimes I tend to follow the money. I do think he's going to get the carries, but in 2 years' time, I think you might be having a decision here with Todd Gurley. So Carson Wentz going at the 501, Matt Ryan going at 502, DK Metcalf, Baker Mayfield, bringing me to my 5th round pick. I ended up going Courtland Sutton. Now, I do live in Denver now, but I am not a Broncos fan. I am a Panthers fan, and I moved here the year after the Panthers lost that Super Bowl to the Broncos. So I've had it a little bit rough since I moved here, but I did end up watching a lot of Broncos football as well. I'm in on Courtland Sutton. I'm in on the talent. I know some people think he's going to be limited, and that was kind of his ceiling, and now you got Jerry Jeudy and the other options, the other additions there in Denver, but I'm just in on Courtland Sutton, so I was willing to risk that pick there. I'm happy about having Courtland Sutton. At that time, he was my wide receiver one. Again, I have a trade to bring up before we get out of here why he is no longer my wide receiver one. But I was happy with it at the time. Where are you guys at with Courtland Sutton?
He was my number one pick in his draft class, actually. I liked him quite a bit. I liked his film at SMU. I thought he was being underrated in his draft class. I think he's really good. I do think there's something to how many weapons there are there. If Drew Lock turns into a stud, it won't matter. If he's just a game manager, then Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant and KJ Hamler could cut into his targets. But I do like Courtland Sutton, and I mean, I'm comfortable taking him where you took him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's an excellent route runner. He's got that ball control. He can make that play after the catch. And with those other weapons, too, I think defenses aren't going to be able to focus on him as much as maybe they would if he was the only guy. So I think you got a good value there as well.
Leonard Fournette goes at the next pick there, followed by CeeDee Lamb. A little early for CeeDee Lamb with everybody left on the board, and my personal opinion. Alex, I think you actually ran into a good value yourself here with DJ Chark. I think what we saw over the first half of the season for Chark was pretty real. Obviously, he had, I think he tweaked an ankle or a knee or something, and he just didn't quite get back into the rhythm. Plus, the Jags were going between Gardner Minshew and Nick Foles there for a bit. So, how you feel about DJ Chark going into 2020?
I am very high on him. I'm trying to grab him in almost every league I can, especially at this point of the draft. With that, he has that chemistry that he got with Gardner Minshew, and the Jags trading away Foles made their commitment to Minshew, and they already have the chemistry. And I was listening to an interview with DJ Chark, and he was talking about how the third year was when everything really just clicked for him. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't feel like he has to think about everything he's doing all the time. And it's kind of become that muscle memory where, okay, this is the play, I know what I got to do. And when you can add that to your game, it means that your talent can shine on, and I think we saw that a little bit last year.
Yeah, he's no doubt the one there in Jacksonville. Chris, you fell into the 5'10" slot here and grabbed Cooper Kupp. How do you feel about Cooper Kupp with the change in the Rams offense, kind of seeing more 12 personnel there at the end of the season? And do you feel like Cooper Kupp is the one over Robert Woods there in Los Angeles?
On Kupp, I like Kupp. I'm a 49ers fan, so, it doesn't ever feel great getting a Ram or a Seahawk on my rosters, but I draft value. At this point, receiver was a little bit starting to thin out. I had to get my number 2. Mm-hmm. And Jared Goff loves Cooper Kupp from the moment they started playing together a couple of years ago. He's younger than Robert Woods. I think he probably sticks around longer than Robert Woods. And I don't think that even if Woods is the number 1, Cooper Kupp is the number 2 in that offense. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball with that offensive line consistently. They're going to have to pass. They jettisoned a lot of talent on that defense the last couple of years. They're cap-strapped. I think they're going to be throwing the ball a ton.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not necessarily sold on the talent of Jared Goff, but to your credit, he does love some Cooper Kupp, so I think you'll be A-okay there with Kupp.
Yeah, Cooper Kupp is also that red zone target that Goff loves to go to. And one of the other things, if I can mention it, there's been a lot of talk of the Rams moving to 12 personnel. Mm-hmm. Well, they ran it more than any other team last year, and that was still only 62% of the plays that they ran. So they're still going to have plenty of opportunity for Kupp to get on the field. And they can also move him into the slot with a twin receiver set on the side. So he's going to be able to get his work if he's not working on the outside. Yeah, they'll find a way to get him involved.
He'll work on the outside. Do we really think Van Jefferson is going to push him out he's not in 2 receiver sets?
No. It's not that I think that Kupp is going to get pushed out of the lineup in 2 wide receiver sets. I just think he personally thrives more in the 3 wide receiver sets. Sure. It's not that, Kupp's going to be on the field. There's no question about that. Keenan Allen, Chris Carson round out round number 5. Le'Veon Bell goes at the 6:01 to start things off. Stephon Diggs, I felt like I needed to grab another wide receiver. The one that I had my eye on, I did not feel was going to come back. I'll get into with Chris here. So I ended up going Terry McLaurin. I think he's the clear and obvious wide receiver 1 there in Washington, the Washington football team, as they are now known. Terry McLaurin, man, everything I saw about this kid, absolutely loved it. Think he's going to be a stud for years to come. I was thrilled to trade up and get Terry McLaurin. First time I've been able to nab him in a Dynasty Startup. Evan Ingram goes next. Jerry Jeudy, Tua Tagovailoa going off the board in the 6th round as well. As Chris mentioned, this QB-heavy draft. Chris and I, with this swap here, you end up going Darren Waller, your second tight end in this format of 2 PPR. You believe in Waller keeping up with that volume there in Vegas?
Well, first off, with the trade, just so people know, what I gave up 4 spots in round 2, so you and I moved back 4 spots. Mm-hmm. Round 6. And in exchange, you let me move up in round 7 and round 9. Yeah. Given that I was torn where you traded, McLaurin was probably going to be my pick where you moved up. But I was torn between him and several other players, including Evan Ingram, Darren Waller, and James Conner. And when I moved back there, Ingram was off the board, thought hard about James Conner. But I just saw only a few more tight ends that I really liked. And I wanted to give a tight end in the flex a chance in this format. I've played this format once before, did not go tight end heavy, and I want to try that out in this format. I do think Ruggs and others could cut into Waller's use, but Derek Carr loves throwing to the tight end, and he's a conservative thrower historically. So I think Waller will still see 90 to 100 targets from that tight end position. Maybe I'm projecting him for closer to 70 to 75 catches, but that's still 150 PBR points in this format.
Yeah, in this format. Yeah, I think that's another good value falling there. Matt Stafford going right after that. Robert Woods, James Conner, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff rounding out round number 6. Devin Singletary starting out things in round number 7. Marquise Brown, Sam Darnold, Tyler Lockett, Hunter Henry. Part of that trade I made with Chris puts you back in the 706 where you take an interesting player in Darius Geis. Obviously, Geis has had trouble staying on the field, but he's given the A-OK. And, man, when he's out there, he looks good. I still think Washington is on the come-up, even with Dwayne Haskins. So, how you feel about Geis and his prospects of staying out there? And if he stays out there, what do you think he's going to do, man?
So here I thought about Deebo Samuel, Hunt a little bit, but I'm still taking Hunt more as a Chubb handcuff for now. I see the value. I liked Geis at LSU more than I liked Fournette, if I'm being honest. I think he's more explosive. I think he's more elusive. And I did some research on him. You know, it's a limited field because he only played a few games last year and he didn't play his rookie year. But last year, his yards after contact was something around 5.4 yards after contact. I believe that, I mean, I know it's inflated a little bit from a couple of big runs, but that's way more than people like Leonard Fournette get. So if he can stay healthy, you know, I needed a third running back at this point, and I just liked his youth. I liked his upside, but it's a risky pick.
Yeah, it is, but I think with where you went with your team, it's one that, you know, if it pans out, you're going to be sitting real nice and pretty happy with that pick. The aforementioned Deebo Samuel going right after that, followed by Kareem Hunt and Alex. Man, I was real nervous when it got to your pick because I was still setting on just Austin Eckler as my RB1. I hadn't taken a running back. I was split between 2 running backs. They are, in fact, the 2 running backs that went right here between you and myself. You ended up going Ronald Jones. I ended up going David Johnson. Why did you go Jones over Johnson?
One of the things is his age, and with that offense that he's going to be in, there's the opportunity. He's been stone hands to this point, but there's still a chance that he runs into a few passes from Tom Brady with the statue that he has been playing quarterback the last few years.
He does look like he's been working on it in the offseason, though.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too. We've heard a lot about Ronald Jones in the offseason working on his pass blocking, and if that's the case and he could stay on the field, the Buccaneers had also let Peyton Barber walk, so they were kind of making that commitment to Ronald Jones a little earlier in the offseason, and I just think with that offense, it's going to be much better. He actually had 6 runs of 20-plus yards last season, which I think a lot of people don't realize. And he had a lot of runs called back for offensive holding penalties. So with the offensive line improving and with the fact that that offense is going to be better, I think it spells a lot of success for Ronald Jones.
Yeah, and I think Ronald Jones has definitely been working on himself over the offseason. Tampa Bay's situation as a whole is going to be improved. They're not going to be having to throw for their life every single game. So Ronald Jones might be getting some more attempts. I opted to go for David Johnson here. At this point, honestly, frankly, you left me with no choice. I would have went Rojo had you not. But I go David Johnson in the hopes that Bill O'Brien is going to use him out of the slot, hoping he'll get some work here in this PPR format. So David Johnson as my RB2, not thrilled about it. It's not like a sexy pick at this point, but it might get me to where I need to go with the rest of this roster that I've assembled. So Jalen Reagor, Drew Lock, rounding out round number 7. We fall into round 8 here. Adam Thielen goes, Jarvis Landry, and Chris, you finally get into the quarterback mix with Drew Brees. Drew Brees, in theory, has 1 to 2 years. Obviously, he has at least this year left. We'll see about next year, but do you think you get more than the 1 season out of Brees? Are you okay if you only get the 1 season out of Brees here?
So I have several thoughts here when I was making this pick. One was I never would have gone a quarterback even this early if there weren't already like 15 off the board. So at this point, I feel comfortable that my roster can compete this year. I've got Julio as an older wide receiver one. I'm good at my running back spot. With some luck, I can be in the playoffs this year. And I'm fine with Drew Brees helping me get there. And he was the guy I felt most comfortable giving me immediate. Him and Tom Brady were the two I liked most to give me top 10 QB performance possibly this year. The other... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if it makes you feel any better, QB 19 is where you actually got Drew Brees.
There you go. So there was only 13 starting QBs left on the board, so my hand was forced.
Sure.
The other thought process I have in Dynasty is next year I see 3 or 4 quarterbacks worthy of being picked in the rookie draft. And I recently did some research. QBs usually fall in rookie drafts in Dynasty. So, I was sitting there thinking, even if I'm competitive and good next year, I should have a shot to draft a talented quarterback because the first 5 or 6 picks in rookie drafts are almost always running backs and receivers.
So let's jump into Alex's pick here, going at the 804 with Michael Gallup. Obviously a little bit more of a crowded house there in Dallas this year, but I think Gallup is actually the better value. I think you got to steal CeeDee Lamb going 3 rounds before Gallup. Certainly wouldn't have went CeeDee Lamb quite that high. I like the talent of CeeDee Lamb. I'd be pretty thrilled about the value of Michael Gallup here.
Yeah, I was very happy to have him fall to me at this point in the draft, and I started going real receiver heavy here with the 3 wide receivers starting and 3 flex. I thought it was going to start to get pretty thin.
Yeah.
But Michael Gallup, too, last year, a lot of people don't realize he played 2 less games than Amari Cooper and only had 7 less targets. So he was actually getting more targets per game than Amari Cooper last year. And Amari Cooper's that real big boomer bust kind of player where Michael Gallup is going to be that more steady option. And I feel like he still has value.
Yeah, no, I do think Gallup is on the come up there in Dallas. I think he's going to end up sticking around. I think there is a world where Amari Cooper doesn't finish his contract as a Cowboy. Personally, I think they could move on and go CeeDee Lamb and Gallup. Maybe I'm alone in that boat, but I like Gallup and Lamb here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the Cowboys actually built themselves an out in the Amari Cooper contract to where they can walk away next year without any penalty. So there's a very real possibility that it goes to Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb show in Dallas.
Keyshawn Vaughn at the 805, Tyler Boyd at the 806. Much like Chris had mentioned, I felt like my hand at this point was kind of forced. I really needed to develop my starting wide receiver core. I went Devontae Parker. I've never had Devontae Parker. I wasn't thrilled with the pick, but I was just looking at what was left on the board, and I felt like I was going to take my shot and hope that what we got out of Devontae Parker last season was going to stick there in Miami. Now, obviously, they got Preston Williams coming back. The change could end up going to Tua Tagovailoa there before the season ends. So, I don't have Parker anymore on the team. We'll talk about it in just a second. But, how do you guys feel about Parker? Do you think the breakout was real?
Well, I was just going to say, I have my reservations about it simply because a lot of his breakout and big performance games came after Preston Williams got hurt. Granted, he was playing with Josh Rosen for part of the season, so you don't know how much that played into it. One of my concerns with that offense is we don't know when it's going to be Tua that takes over and how many games you're going to get with Fitzpatrick, and I think that's a lot of the success that Parker saw. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, yeah, we all have been there where we've invested in a guy multiple times and been burned. Parker's one of those guys who's burned me in the past. But he not only did he burn me when I had him, but in my home league last year, of course, when I get to the playoffs, the guy I'm playing has Devontae Parker on his team.
Oh, man.
And so it's like, of course, I have you for years. I'd finally get rid of you, and then you beat me. I think he's fine. I think you got good value when you made your trade, though.
Yeah, so Justin Jefferson, Noah Fant, Henry Ruggs, TJ Hawkinson, Brandon Cooks round out round number 8. So what we'll do on the Pick Is In FFP over on Twitter is we'll post up the draft board. We can try to see if we can link up our current teams as well. But I just want to get from each of you guys, we don't have time to run down the whole draft here, but out of your starting lineups and just the draft in general, I'll start with Alex. Alex, what do you feel like was kind of your best value? What do you think your strengths are, and where do you see some gaps in your team?
So I'm happy with my running back core in spite of it being Todd Gurley, and even I may only get this year, or not this year even, but I started to go receiver heavy late, and I really like the receiving core that I put together. I ended up getting Will Fuller later in the draft. One thing that kind of hurt me was, as we mentioned earlier, that Damian Williams pick in the 13th.
Yeah.
I traded a couple picks to get back into that round. I wanted Tariq Cohen in that round, and he went right before me. So I went Damian Williams, and now I wasted that pick and the 2 picks I gave up also because he's opting out this season.
Yeah, it's just part of the Wild West that we're in now with COVID.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it was a good pick at the time, and that's what we ran into, man.
Yeah, and I'm hoping my receivers are able to make up for that. But I have 3 solid running backs in Miles Sanders, Todd Gurley, and Ronald Jones to make up for that a little bit, and I'm heavy at receiver, so I'm also trying to work a trade for Saquon Barkley at the moment, so we'll see if I'm able to pull that off.
We shall see if that goes down. Mr. Josh Jacobs stealing Chris Gregory, man. How do you feel about your team?
I'm up and down on it. I love having Julio. I think Mixon and Jacobs both are RB1s, and that's always my goal, to get 2 RB1s. I kind of followed your lead. I was thinking about doing this already, but you and I both tried the tight end in the flex in this premium. I honestly kind of felt pretty good about getting Tyler Higbee in round 9. I think that, like you guys said, the Rams will run lots of 12 personnel, and that guy ate last season at the end of the season. And around 9, maybe he's a trade asset for me. Sure. And when people figure out I need a tight end, and I've already got 3, so I can trade him. But as a flex option in round 9, he was probably my favorite value of the guys we didn't talk about. And I like Phillip Lindsay. I don't love him as my 4th running back, but with the running back depth as it was, I got Phillip Lindsay in round 12. I don't think Melvin Gordon will be quite what people think he will, and I think Lindsay will find a role either in Denver or somewhere else in the next year or 2.
And I had a pick similar to Alex that I'm, he doesn't know how long he is going to end up getting out of Todd Gurley. I don't know. I had sworn off AJ Green. I even said it in the Dynasty podcast that we did over at DynastyProsFootball.com, the Dynasty Rookie Draft. I had drafted T. Higgins in that, and I was just kind of off of A.J. Green. He fell to me at 10. I'm like, well, you know what? If I get 13 games of A.J. Green this season, then awesome. Teddy Bridgewater as my QB2. Felt terrible about my running backs, honestly, coming out of this. James White and Austin Eckler, along with David Johnson there, is pretty much what I was staring down. I did get Boston Scott in round 14, who I love there in Philly. I think he's going to add some PPR value, and I think I might be able to flex him in more than people think. That's a name I am big on for the season. Let's break down this trade real quick that I ran into. It's not a trade I expected, so I hate my running backs even more now, but I could not say no to this trade. It was posed to me, Michael Thomas for my Austin Eckler and my Devontae Parker. As I had mentioned before, I wasn't big on Parker to begin with. I was high on Eckler, and this was, oddly enough, the second time I had traded Eckler in the same day. So I felt like I was just breaking up with Austin Eckler. Not on purpose, it's just the value that got offered to me. So my running backs are brutal now. David Johnson and James White are my running backs, but I added Michael Thomas. Is there any world where I say no to Michael Thomas at that value?
No, not for that value at all. You posted both of those trades on Twitter, and I had sided with dealing Eckler in both of them. You just got great value all around on both of them. And I was offered the same trade for Michael Thomas, but it was Miles Sanders and A.J. Brown, and I thought that was a little too much to give up, and I hesitated just enough.
Yeah,
you
definitely would have been giving up more than I did.
Yeah, and so I like the value, and if I had been the Eckler owner, I would have done the same trade. If I can circle back just for a second, you had mentioned you're getting Tyler Higbee, Chris. I ended up getting Gerald Everett way later in the draft, and I think that could be a steal also.
I like Everett too.
Yeah, with the 2 points per reception, and if they're going to be running 2 tight ends as much as we think they might be, with how bad that offensive line is, you got a shot with both guys to get value, kind of like that Zach Ertz, Dallas Goddard in Philly.
Yeah, Everett and Herndon are 2 tight ends who I've been in a few drafts where it was either tight end premium or 2 tight ends. And Everett and Herndon are the 2 guys I've been targeting late. Also, Devin Asiasi, I think he's interesting in New England.
So you'll be able to find the entire draft board for this setup over at The Pick is in FFP over there on Twitter. Chris and Alex, thanks for coming in. You can find Chris over on Twitter at @the_pre-snap-read. Alex over at The Line Guy FF. All of our Dynasty writings also over at dynastyprosfootball.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.